The rain came down in sheets that afternoon, turning the steep streets of Seattle into rivers of gray. Ethan Brooks was clearing debris from the gutter when he heard a sharp scrape. Then a cry. A wheelchair was sliding backward down the slick pavement, its occupant gripping the rims with white knuckles. He dropped his shovel and ran, catching her just before the busy intersection. The woman gasped, rain streaming down her pale face. Then, with trembling fingers, she pulled out a set of silver keys, the letter M engraved on the largest one. "Can you take me home?" "I have no one else." Ethan stared at the keys. Mitchell Estate. Everyone in Seattle knew that name, and the woman who had disappeared inside it 3 years ago. Ethan Brooks had learned to measure his life in small victories. Getting Lily to school on time, making rent by the end of the month, finding a smile somewhere in the space between exhaustion and the next shift. At 36, he carried the kind of weariness that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with loss. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building without an elevator, 3 rooms that smelled faintly of old wood and whatever he'd burned for dinner the night before. Every morning, he woke at 5, made breakfast for his daughter, and carried her down 2 flights of stairs because she was still too small to manage them safely with her backpack. Lily was 7, all wild curls and questions that never stopped. The only light that hadn't gone out when her mother died. That had been 4 years ago, a collision on the interstate. A drunk driver who walked away while Sarah didn't. Ethan had been an engineer then, working for a mid-sized construction firm, designing buildings that would stand for generations. After the funeral, he'd tried to keep going, but the numbers wouldn't stay straight on the blueprints. The deadlines felt absurd. Everything felt absurd. He'd quit 6 months later and taken the first job that didn't require him to think too much road maintenance for the city. It paid enough. Barely. But it let him be home when Lily got off the school bus, and that was all that mattered now. Across town, on a hill overlooking Elliott Bay, Clara Mitchell lived in a prison of her own making. The mansion had been in her family for 3 generations, a sprawling estate with gardens that had once hosted charity galas and wedding receptions. Now the hedges grew wild. The fountain stood dry. And the only person who ever walked those halls was Mrs. Lewis, the elderly housekeeper who had stayed on out of loyalty rather than necessity. Clara had been 28 when the accident happened. She'd been driving home from rehearsal, her mind still buzzing with choreography, her body still humming with the memory of movement. She'd been a principal dancer with the Pacific Northwest Ballet, on the verge of a career that could have taken her anywhere. Then a sedan ran a red light. And in the span of 3 seconds, everything she'd built her life around was gone. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. She'd sustained a spinal cord injury at the lumbar level, resulting in complete paralysis from the waist down. Lucky. The word tasted like ash. For the first year, she'd fought. Physical therapy, experimental treatments, surgeries that left her worse than before. Then she'd stopped fighting and started hiding. The press called her the ghost of the hill, the heiress who'd vanished from public life. They speculated, they pitied, they moved on. Clara stayed in the house, managing the family's business holdings from behind a computer screen, seeing no one, going nowhere. Until that rainy afternoon when she'd made the mistake of believing she could go to the corner store alone. Ethan pushed the wheelchair up the long driveway, his shoulders burning with the effort. The incline was steeper than it looked, the pavement slick and treacherous. Clara sat rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She hadn't spoken since giving him the keys. When they finally reached the front entrance, the door swung open before Ethan could knock. A woman in her 60s stood there, her face a mixture of shock and relief. "Miss Clara, what on earth were you thinking, going out alone in this weather?" Clara's voice was calm, almost detached. "I needed air, Mrs. Lewis. This gentleman helped me." She turned her head slightly toward Ethan. "Please, come inside. You're soaked through." Ethan hesitated. His truck was parked half a mile down the hill, and Lily was waiting at a neighbor's apartment. But the woman in the wheelchair was shivering despite the blanket across her lap. And something in her expression, something fragile and fierce, at once made it impossible to leave. He nodded. Just for a minute, the interior of the mansion was like stepping into another era. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, oil paintings in gilded frames. Everything was immaculate and utterly silent, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Mrs. Lewis bustled off to fetch towels, muttering about pneumonia and foolish decisions. Clara gestured toward the sitting room. "My daughter's in the truck," Ethan said quietly. "She's 7. I should bring her in," Clara interrupted. "It's too cold to wait outside." He did. Lily came in wide-eyed, clutching her father's hand, staring at the chandelier overhead like it was made of stars. Mrs. Lewis returned with hot chocolate and a thick blanket, wrapping it around the little girl's shoulders. Clara watched from her chair by the fireplace, her face unreadable. For the first time in 3 years, there were voices in the house that weren't her own. The repair work started small. Clara called Ethan 2 days later and asked if he knew anyone who could fix the ramp leading to the back garden. The wood had rotted through in places, making it impossible for her to go outside safely. Ethan said he could do it himself. He didn't mention that he'd been an engineer, that he knew exactly how to calculate load-bearing requirements and grade transitions. He just said he'd come by on Saturday. Lily came with him. She always did on weekends. There was no one else to watch her, and he wasn't about to leave her alone. Clara didn't seem to mind. If anything, she seemed almost relieved to have the child there. A buffer against the awkward silence between two strangers trying to find common ground. While Ethan worked, Lily explored. She found the old music room, its grand piano covered with a dust sheet. She found the library, filled with books that smelled like time. And she found Clara, sitting by the window in the sunroom, staring out at the overgrown garden. "Do you like flowers?" Lily asked, climbing onto the window seat beside her. Clara blinked, pulled from wherever her mind had been. "I used to. My mom liked flowers," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She died when I was 3. I don't remember her much, but Dad says she had a garden." Clara looked at the girl, really looked at her, and saw no pity there. Just honesty. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Lily shrugged. "It's okay. Dad says she's still with us, just in a different way." She paused, tilting her head. "Do you ever go outside?" "Not much. That's sad," Lily said simply. "Outside is where the best stuff happens." Clara felt something crack in her chest, just a little. Over the following weeks, Ethan kept coming back. There was always something that needed fixing: a rail that was too high, a door threshold that caught the wheelchair, a pathway that was too narrow. He didn't charge much, far less than a contractor would have. Clara suspected he was doing it out of kindness, but she didn't argue. She needed the help. And more than that, she needed the sound of hammering, of footsteps, of life moving through the house again. And Lily kept talking. She talked about school, about her friends, about the stray cat she'd named Pickles, who lived behind their building. She asked Clara questions, easy ones at first, then deeper. "Were you scared after your accident?" "Yes," Clara admitted. "Every day." "Are you still scared?" Clara considered this. "Sometimes, but less when there are people around." Lily nodded sagely. "Dad says that too. He says being alone is when the sad gets too loud." Clara glanced toward the window, where Ethan was measuring a section of decking. She'd started noticing small things. The way he wiped his hands on his jeans before touching anything in the house. The way he always asked permission before moving furniture or opening a window. The way he looked at his daughter like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, the way he looked at her. Not with pity, not with curiosity, just looking, as if trying to solve a problem he didn't yet have the tools for. The article appeared on a Wednesday morning, buried in the lifestyle section of the Seattle Times. It wasn't front-page news, but it was visible enough. "Reclusive heiress spotted," with mystery man. The photo was grainy, taken with a telephoto lens from the street below the estate. It showed Ethan pushing Clara's wheelchair along the newly repaired garden path, Lily skipping ahead of them. The caption speculated wildly. Was this a new romance? A hired companion? The article dredged up Clara's past, the accident, the withdrawn heiress, the family fortune, and painted Ethan as an outsider, a man of uncertain background who'd somehow gained access to the Mitchell estate. By noon, the board of directors at Mitchell Holdings had called an emergency meeting. By 2 o'clock, Clara was sitting in her study with 4 men in suits, explaining very carefully why this was a problem. "Public perception matters, Clara," said Martin Hendricks, the board chairman, his tone condescending in the way only old money could manage. "Your family built this company on reputation. We can't have people thinking you're being taken advantage of." "Taken advantage of?" Clara's voice was cold. "He's a contractor doing repairs. He's a road worker," another board member interjected. "No formal qualifications. A single father with a child in tow. It looks like I'm finally living my life," Clara snapped. But they didn't stop. They talked about stock prices, investor confidence, the optics of a Mitchell associating with someone so far beneath her social standing. They didn't say it outright. But the message was clear. Send him away, or face consequences. That evening, Ethan arrived to finish the railing on the north terrace. Clara was waiting in the foyer, her face a mask. Mrs. Lewis stood nearby, wringing her hands. "Ethan," Clara said, her voice flat, "I need to let you go." He stared at her. "What?" "The work is finished. I don't require your services anymore." Her hands were shaking, hidden beneath the blanket on her lap. "I'll pay you for the full month. Mrs. Lewis has the check." Lily, who'd been coloring at the kitchen table, appeared in the doorway. "But we were going to plant the flower seeds." "That won't be necessary," Clara said, still not looking at Ethan. "Thank you for your help. Goodbye." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd been dismissed before by clients, by employers, but this felt different. This felt like betrayal. He took the check from Mrs. Lewis without a word, picked up Lily, and walked out. The door closed behind them with a hollow thud. Clara sat motionless in the foyer for a long time. When Mrs. Lewis finally came to check on her, the older woman found her employer staring at the set of silver keys on the entry table, tears running silently down her face. "I had to," Clara whispered. "I had to protect him." "From what, dear?" "From me." The storm rolled in 3 nights later. One of those rare Pacific Northwest tempests that turned the sky black and the wind into something feral. By 8 o'clock, the power was out across half the city. By 9, emergency services were overwhelmed with calls about downed trees and flooding. Ethan was in his apartment, listening to the battery-powered radio and trying to keep Lily calm when the news report came through. Multiple mudslides reported on Queen Anne Hill. Residents in the affected area are advised to evacuate immediately. Emergency crews are responding. Queen Anne Hill, the Mitchell estate. Ethan's stomach dropped. He looked at Lily, already in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Sweetheart, I need you to go stay with Mrs. Kaminsky next door for a little while." "Why?" "I have to check on someone." "Miss Clara?" Lily's eyes were wide. "Dad, is she okay?" He didn't answer. He just kissed her forehead, knocked on the neighbor's door, and ran. The drive up the hill was a nightmare. Streets were flooded, branches torn from trees and scattered across the road. Twice he had to backtrack and find another route. When he finally reached the estate, the front gate was hanging open, swinging wildly in the wind. The house was dark. He pounded on the front door. No answer. He tried the handle locked. He went around to the side entrance, the one near the kitchen. Also locked. Then he heard a faint sound, barely audible over the storm. A voice, calling for help. He didn't think. He picked up a decorative stone from the garden border and smashed the window beside the door, reaching through to unlock it from the inside. The interior of the house was pitch black and eerily silent except for the wind howling outside. "Clara!" His voice echoed through the halls. "Where are you?" "Here," the voice came from upstairs, weak and strained. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his phone flashlight cutting through the darkness. He found her at the top of the landing. The wheelchair had tipped on its side, and Clara was on the floor halfway to the staircase, her hands raw from dragging herself across the carpet. Mrs. Lewis was unconscious a few feet away, a gash on her forehead where she'd struck the wall during the power outage. "I couldn't reach the phone," Clara gasped. "The chair had tipped when I was trying to help her." Ethan knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he checked for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No. Just I couldn't." Her voice broke. "I couldn't do anything. You're okay now," he said quietly. He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest, and carried her down the stairs. She was lighter than he expected, her body fragile in his arms. He settled her on the couch in the sitting room, then went back for Mrs. Lewis, who was starting to come around. The housekeeper had a concussion, but she'd live. He called 911, but the dispatcher said it would be hours before anyone could reach them. The roads were impassable. So Ethan stayed. He found candles and a first aid kit. He cleaned Mrs. Lewis's wound and made sure she was comfortable. He checked every window, every door, making sure the house was secure against the storm. And then he sat down across from Clara, who hadn't spoken since he'd carried her downstairs. "Why did you come?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "You knew I'd come," he said simply. She looked at him, and in the candlelight, he saw the truth written across her face. Fear, shame, relief. "I sent you away to protect you," she whispered. "From the board, from the press, from being associated with you?" Ethan's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Clara, I've been broke, unemployed, and widowed. I've raised a daughter in a walk-up apartment while working road maintenance. I don't give a damn what anyone thinks about who I associate with. They'll make your life difficult. They already did that when they took my wife." The words hung in the air between them. Then Clara did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it over his. "I was afraid," she said. "I'm still afraid. Not of them, of this. Of wanting something I didn't think I deserved anymore." Ethan turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, in the quiet darkness, something shifted. Something neither of them had the words for yet. But it was there. Real. Undeniable. The storm lasted through the night, and by morning, the city was a mess of downed power lines and blocked roads. Ethan stayed, not because he had the roads cleared by noon, but because Clara asked him to. And Mrs. Lewis needed someone strong enough to help her navigate the house until the power came back on. 3 days passed before the electricity was restored. 3 days of candlelit meals and quiet conversations, and Ethan fixing things that had broken in the chaos. He reset the circuit breakers, repaired the window he'd smashed, and reinforced the railing on the second-floor landing that had come loose when the wheelchair tipped. And he watched Clara, really watched. He saw the way she maneuvered herself from the wheelchair to the couch, her arms strong despite the fragility of her legs. He saw the frustration that flickered across her face when she dropped something and had to figure out how to retrieve it. He saw the moment, late on the second night, when she tried to reach a book on a high shelf and nearly fell, and the way she sat there afterward, hands clenched in her lap, fighting tears. "Let me help," he'd said quietly. "I don't want to need help," she'd replied. "I know." He'd handed her the book anyway. By the third night, Mrs. Lewis was well enough to insist on making dinner. Though Ethan did most of the actual cooking, they ate in the dining room, just the 3 of them, the long table feeling less cavernous with food and conversation filling it. Afterward, when Mrs. Lewis had gone to bed, Clara and Ethan sat in the study. The fire was going, casting warm light over the dark wood and leather furniture. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. Ethan nodded. "When did you stop being angry?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I did. I just learned to carry it differently. For Lily, she needed a father, not a ghost. I think I've been a ghost," Clara said softly. "For 3 years. You're not anymore." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because ghosts don't feel things. And I see you feeling everything." It was true. Since the night of the storm, something had broken open inside her. The numbness she'd cultivated so carefully, the walls she'd built to keep the pain at bay, they were crumbling. And it was terrifying, because feeling meant wanting, and wanting meant hoping. And hope was the most dangerous thing of all. "I used to dance," she said suddenly. "I know. No, I mean I loved it. It wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. And when I lost that," her voice cracked, "I thought I'd lost everything that mattered." "You didn't. How do you know?" she asked again, almost pleading. "End of time." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes steady on hers. "Because you're still here. You're still fighting. Even when you tell yourself you're not. Even when you hide, you're fighting. I see it every day." Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Want something again." "Want." She stopped, but the silence finished the sentence for her. Ethan stood and crossed to her chair. He knelt in front of her, so they were eye to eye, and took both her hands in his. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said. And for the first time in 3 years, Clara believed him. When the power came back on and the roads cleared, Ethan didn't leave. Clara offered him a contract official this time, with paperwork drawn up by her lawyers. She wanted to build something on the estate. She explained. A rehabilitation path. A space designed for people with mobility challenges. A place where they could practice navigating outdoor terrain safely. She called it Hope Path. Ethan called it brilliant. He threw himself into the design with the kind of energy he hadn't felt since before Sarah died. He sketched plans late into the night, calculating gradients and surface materials, researching accessibility standards and adaptive equipment. Clara worked alongside him, contributing ideas from her own experience, what worked, what didn't, the tiny details that made the difference between independence and frustration. Lily was there most days, appointed as the official chief flower planter by Clara. The little girl took her role seriously, consulting seed catalogs and mapping out where the colors would look best. She chattered constantly, filling the house with noise and life. And Clara found herself laughing, actually laughing at the child's endless stories and observations. The local press got wind of the project, but this time, the coverage was different. Positive, inspiring. They called Clara a champion for accessibility, a woman turning personal tragedy into public good. Photographers came to document the construction. A few local nonprofits reached out, offering support and volunteers. But Clara barely noticed the attention. She was too busy watching Ethan work. He moved with precision and purpose, his hands sure and capable, whether he was hammering in a post or adjusting the height of a handrail. She'd learned things about him in the weeks since the storm. That he'd graduated summa cum laude from the University of Washington with a degree in civil engineering. That he'd walked away from a promising career because grief had made it impossible to focus. That he still woke up some nights thinking Sarah was beside him, and the realization that she wasn't hit him like a fresh wound every time. She'd told him things too. About the months after the accident, when she'd wished she'd died in the crash. About the surgery that was supposed to restore some sensation but had only left her in more pain. About the night she'd thrown every dance trophy she'd ever won into the fireplace and watched them melt. They were both broken people, she realized. Both trying to build something new from the wreckage. Maybe that was why it worked. One afternoon, a reporter from a local news station came to interview Clara about Hope Path. The segment aired that evening, showing the nearly completed path, the adaptive features, the garden that Lily had planted. At the end, the reporter asked Clara what had inspired the project. Clara had glanced off camera to where Ethan was standing, just out of frame, and smiled. Someone reminded me that not all paths require you to walk. Some just require you to keep moving forward. The clip went viral. Within a week, donations were pouring in from across the state. Clara established a foundation to manage the funds, with plans to build similar paths in other cities. And through it all, Ethan was there. Not just as a contractor, as something more. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Clara was in the sitting room, practicing transfers from her wheelchair to the couch. It was part of her daily routine, maintaining the upper body strength and balance she'd need to stay independent. Ethan was in the next room, installing a lowered light switch Clara had requested. He heard the sound a gasp, then a thud, and was through the doorway in seconds. Clara had made it halfway to the couch when her arms gave out. She was on the floor, one hand still gripping the armrest, her face twisted in frustration. "I had it," she said through clenched teeth. I know," Ethan said, already moving to help. "You don't need to, I know," he repeated. He knelt beside her, sliding one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. She weighed almost nothing in his arms. He lifted her gently, but instead of placing her on the couch, he held her there, their faces inches apart. She could feel his breath, warm against her cheek, could see the silver threading through the dark hair at his temples, could count the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. "You don't always have to catch me," she whispered. "I know," he said a third time, "but I want to be here when you need me." Her hand came up, trembling, and touched his jaw. Rough with stubble. Real. "Why? You know why." And she did. She'd known for weeks, maybe longer. She'd just been too afraid to name it. "Ethan, you don't have to say anything," he said softly. "I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to know. In case you felt it too." She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "That I'm not enough. That this body that I can't." She couldn't finish. The words were too heavy, too raw. But Ethan understood. He always did. "Clara, listen to me." His voice was firm, the same tone he used when teaching Lily something important. "You are not your legs. You are your mind, your heart, your strength, your courage. You are the woman who built a foundation to help strangers, who made my daughter laugh when I didn't think she'd laugh again, who survived something that should have destroyed you and came out fighting. That's who you are." And that he paused, making sure she was looking at him. "That is more than enough." The tears came then, hot and sudden, and Clara buried her face against his shoulder. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words she couldn't quite hear but understood anyway. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and wet, and she felt utterly exposed and utterly safe. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I," Ethan said, "but I'd like to try. If you would." She nodded, unable to speak. So she did the only thing she could. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they broke apart, Ethan was smiling a real smile, the kind she'd only seen him give Lily. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she echoed. And just like that, the world shifted again. The grand opening of Hope Path took place on a Saturday in late spring, 6 months after construction began. The sky was clear, the air warm but not hot. Perfect weather for the crowd that gathered on the estate grounds. There were reporters, city officials, representatives from disability advocacy groups, and dozens of people in wheelchairs or using other mobility aids, all eager to try the path that had been designed with them in mind. Clara sat near the entrance, greeting guests, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Public appearances still terrified her. But Ethan stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and that made it bearable. Lily was running around with a group of other children, showing them the flower gardens she'd helped plant. The girl had insisted on wearing her nicest dress for the occasion, pink with white flowers, and she'd braided her own hair, mostly successfully. When the ceremony began, the mayor gave a speech about community and accessibility. Then Clara was introduced. Ethan wheeled her to the podium that had been set up at the trailhead, and she looked out at the sea of faces. She'd written a speech. She'd practiced it a dozen times, but now, with everyone watching, the words felt wrong. Too formal. Too distant. So she set the note cards aside and spoke from the heart. 3 years ago, I had an accident that changed my life. For a long time, I believed that change meant the end of everything I valued. My independence, my purpose, my future. She paused, glancing at Ethan. I was wrong. Change didn't end those things. It just forced me to redefine them. And I couldn't have done that alone. She gestured to the path behind her, its smooth surface winding through the gardens and down toward the overlook. This path isn't just for people with disabilities. It's for anyone who's ever felt stuck, anyone who's ever believed that they couldn't move forward. It's a reminder that progress doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it requires help, but it's still progress. The applause was thunderous. Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion, but she held it together. Barely. After the speeches, she led the first group down the path. The gradient was gentle, the surface smooth, but textured enough to provide traction. There were handrails at intervals, rest benches, and a covered pavilion halfway down, where people could stop and enjoy the view of the bay. At the end of the path, there was a plaque. Ethan had designed it, and Clara had approved the inscription. Hope is not the belief that everything will be easy. It is the courage to keep moving when the path is hard. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the gardens, Clara found herself alone with Ethan and Lily at the overlook. The crowd had dispersed, the reporters had left, and the estate was quiet again. "Did we do good, Miss Clara?" Lily asked, climbing onto the bench beside her. Clara smiled, wrapping an arm around the girl. "We did great, sweetheart." Ethan stood at the railing, looking out at the city below. "You know, this is just the beginning, right? We've already got requests from 3 other cities wanting to build something similar." Clara wheeled over to join him. "Good. Let's do it." He looked down at her, surprised. "You sure? It's going to be a lot of work." "I'm sure." She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. "Besides, I have a pretty good team." 2 weeks after the opening, Clara called Ethan into the study. He came in to find her sitting at the desk, a wooden box in front of her. She looked nervous, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her wheelchair. "Sit down," she said. He did. Confused. "What's this about?" Clara took a breath, then slid the box across the desk toward him. "Open it." Inside was a set of keys. The same silver keys she'd given him that rainy afternoon so many months ago, but beneath them was something else. A business card with his name embossed in black ink. Ethan Brooks, Director of Accessibility Projects, Hope Path Foundation. He stared at it. "Clara." "It's a full-time position," she said quickly, as if afraid he'd refuse before she could explain. "Salary, benefits, the works. You'd oversee all the construction projects, work with architects and city planners, manage the contractors." She faltered. "It's what you were meant to do." Ethan picked up the card, running his thumb over the raised lettering. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." Her voice was steady now. "The first time I gave you those keys, I was asking for help because I was desperate and alone. Today, I'm giving them back. Because I trust you. Because I believe in you. And because," she paused, her eyes meeting his, "because I love you." The words hung in the air, huge and terrifying and perfect. Ethan set the card down carefully and moved around the desk. He knelt in front of her wheelchair, taking both her hands in his. "Say that again." "I love you," Clara repeated, her voice stronger this time. "I love you, and I love Lily. And I want to build a life with you. If you'll have me." He kissed her then, deep and sure, pouring 3 years of grief and loneliness and hope into it. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning. "Is that a yes?" Clara asked breathlessly. "That's a hell yes." Lily, who'd been eavesdropping from the hallway, chose that moment to burst into the room. "Does this mean we get to live in the big house now?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. Ethan laughed, pulling his daughter into the embrace. "Would you like that?" "Yes." Lily threw her arms around Clara's neck. "And Miss Clara can teach me to paint. And we can have tea parties in the garden." And Pickles the cat can come live here too. Clara looked at Ethan over the girl's head, her eyes shining. I think we can manage that. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to build. 1 year later, Hope Path Foundation had expanded to 5 cities across Washington and Oregon, with plans for 3 more in development. The original path on the Mitchell estate had become a model, featured in accessibility journals and urban planning conferences. Clara had been invited to speak at universities, at medical centers, at advocacy events. She said yes to some and no to others, learning to balance her private life with her public mission. Ethan had stepped fully into his role as director, traveling to oversee new projects, training local teams, ensuring every path met the highest standards. He still wore work boots and got his hands dirty, but now he did it with a team behind him and a purpose driving him forward. And Lily thrived. She attended a private school now, one with smaller classes and teachers who encouraged her curiosity. She still planted flowers in the estate gardens, still talked to anyone who would listen, still called Clara by her first name because Miss felt too formal for someone who was practically family. On a quiet evening in late autumn, the 3 of them sat on the terrace overlooking the bay. The gardens were ablaze with fall color, and the setting sun painted everything in shades of amber and rose. Lily was at the piano in the music room, practicing a piece she'd learned from the teacher Clara had hired for her. The notes drifted through the open windows, soft and slightly imperfect. Clara sat in her wheelchair, a blanket across her lap, her hand resting in Ethan's. He sat beside her on the stone bench, his jacket draped over the back, sleeves rolled up despite the cooling air. "Do you ever think about that day?" Clara asked. "Which one?" "The day you found me in the rain." Ethan smiled. "Every day." "Why?" "Because it was the day I stopped, just surviving and started living again." He squeezed her hand. "What about you?" Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the light fade over the water. "I think about how close I came to refusing help. How close I came to just giving up. But you didn't." "No," she agreed. "I didn't. I reached out. And you were there." End quote. "I'll always be there," Ethan said simply. She turned to look at him. This man who'd appeared in her life like some kind of miracle, who'd seen her at her weakest and never once looked away. "You know, when I gave you those keys that first time, I told you I had no one else. I believed that was true. And now? Now I know I was wrong. I had myself. I just needed someone to remind me that was enough to start with." She paused. "And then I needed you. And Lily. And this." She gestured to the estate, the foundation, the life they'd built together. All of this. Ethan leaned over and kissed her temple. "You built this. I just helped." "We built it," she corrected. "Together." From inside, Lily finished her piece and immediately started playing it again, stumbling over the same passage she always did. They listened, neither of them pointing out the mistakes, just enjoying the sound of life filling the old house. "She's going to be amazing one day," Clara said. "She already is. I meant at piano." Ethan laughed. "That too." The sky deepened to purple, and lights began to flicker on across the city below. The house glowed warm behind them, and somewhere in the distance, a fairy horn sounded its low, mournful note. Clara thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, isolated, bitter, convinced her life was over. She thought about the man beside her, who'd lost everything, and somehow found the strength to keep going. She thought about the little girl inside, who'd lost her mother, but refused to lose her joy. And she thought about the thousands of people who would walk the paths they'd built, people who needed to believe that forward motion was still possible, even when everything felt impossible. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Stopping that day. Helping me. Getting tangled up in all of this." Ethan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Clara, before I met you, I was going through the motions. Working. Raising Lily. Surviving. But I wasn't really living. You gave that back to me. Purpose. Hope. Love." He cupped her face gently. So no, I don't regret a single second. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I love you. I love you too. They sat like that as darkness fell, wrapped in the kind of peace that only comes after surviving the storm. And when Lily finally abandoned the piano and came running out to ask if they could toast marshmallows in the fire pit, they said yes. Because that was what families did. They made time for the small joys. They celebrated the ordinary moments that somehow became extraordinary. They kept moving forward, together, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The story of the single father and the heiress, the road worker and the dancer, the helper and the helped. It wasn't about one dramatic moment of rescue. It was about all the small moments that followed, the choices made every day to show up, to try, to believe that broken things could be mended and lost things could be found again. As Ethan started the fire and Lily ran to get the marshmallows, Clara sat in her wheelchair and looked up at the house. Her house. Their house now. And she realized something she'd never thought she'd feel again. She was home. Not because of the building or the address or the legacy attached to the family name, but because of the people inside it. The people who'd taught her that some paths required wheels instead of feet, that some families were chosen rather than born, and that some keys opened more than just doors. They opened possibilities. The camera pulled back, metaphorically speaking, from the terrace where firelight danced and laughter rose into the night. It pulled back from the estate on the hill, its windows glowing like promises. It pulled back from the city of Seattle spread out below, where somewhere a man was finishing his shift on road maintenance, where somewhere a woman was wheeling herself home from physical therapy, where somewhere 1,000 small acts of kindness were happening unseen and uncelebrated. And the narrator, the omniscient voice that had followed this story from the beginning, offered one final observation. Sometimes, the most important journeys don't require you to travel far. Sometimes they only require you to stop, to notice, to reach out your hand to someone who needs it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that person reaches back, and everything changes.